My dad sold my dog without telling me. He didn't know where he'd end up. I came home one afternoon and my dog was gone. Not gone like he'd slipped through the fence and was somewhere in the neighborhood. Not gone like he was at the vet or staying with a friend. Gone like he had never been there. His bed was missing. His bowls were missing. His leash was gone from the hook by the door. Every single physical trace of him had been removed from the house with a thoroughness that could only mean one thing: someone had planned this. Someone had done this deliberately while I was away and had made sure there was nothing left to find. I was 17 years old and I stood in the kitchen doorway and I felt the floor shift under me like the house itself had become unreliable. His name was Ranger. He was a 3-year-old golden retriever with fur the color of late afternoon sunlight and eyes so warm and steady they made you feel like everything was going to be okay even when nothing was. He had been mine since he was 8 weeks old. He had been my best friend, my constant, the one living creature in that house who made it feel like home. And my father had sold him, without telling me, without asking me, without a single word. What my father didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was where Ranger would end up. And what Ranger would do when he got there. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end where you think it does. I want to tell you about Ranger before I tell you about losing him, because you need to understand what he was before you can understand what it meant when he was gone. I got Ranger the summer before 8th grade, which is the kind of detail that sounds small, but actually means everything when you understand the context. That summer was the summer my parents' marriage finally, definitively, and very loudly fell apart. It had been falling apart for years. Everyone in the house knew it, even if nobody said it out loud, but that summer was when it stopped being a quiet, managed collapse and became something loud and sharp and impossible to look away from. There were arguments that went until 2 in the morning. There were doors slammed so hard the pictures on the walls shook. There was a particular kind of tension that lived in that house during those months, a hell breath. Everything is about to break tension that made even simple things feel loaded. Dinner was a minefield. Watching television together was a negotiation. Asking a simple question felt like you might accidentally detonate something. My older sister, Cara, was 18 that summer and had the option of escaping. She spent most of it at her boyfriend's house or her friend's place, and I didn't blame her for a single minute. But I was 13. I didn't have an escape. I just had the house and the tension and the particular loneliness of being the younger kid in a family that was quietly coming apart. My mom was the one who suggested the dog. She said it in this careful, sideways way she had when she was suggesting something she knew my father might object to. I think it might be good for Jamie, she said at dinner one night. A dog. Some company. My father looked up from his plate. He was a practical man, my father. Not unkind, at least not originally, but very practical. He thought in terms of costs and logistics and effort required. A dog is a lot of work, he said. Jamie's responsible, my mom said. He'd take care of it. There was a pause that had about 15 years of complicated marriage packed into it. Then my father said, fine. Just that. Fine. And went back to his dinner. I don't think he meant it as a gift. I think he meant it as a concession, something thrown into the ongoing negotiation of their marriage. But the result was the same. 2 weeks later, my mom drove me to a breeder 40 minutes outside of town, and I walked into a room full of golden retriever puppies tumbling over each other, and one of them, the one with slightly oversized paws and a tiny white patch on his left ear, walked directly over to me, sat down on my feet, and looked up at me with those warm brown eyes like he had already made a decision that I was still catching up to. I named him Ranger on the drive home. He slept on my lap the whole way, his small warm weight pressing against my legs, and I held him carefully with both hands and felt something in my chest that had been tight for a long time begin, very slightly, to loosen. My parents divorced officially 8 months later. My mom moved to an apartment 20 minutes away, which was close enough for regular visits, but far enough that the house felt fundamentally changed. My sister had already left for college by then. And so it was just me and my father in the house and Ranger. My relationship with my father is something I've spent a lot of years trying to understand and describe accurately because I don't want to make him into a villain when the truth is more complicated than that. He was a good man in a lot of ways. He worked hard. He showed up. He went to my school events and made sure there was food in the house and kept the lights on and the bills paid without complaint. He did all the things you're supposed to do as a parent, and he did them consistently. But he was also a man who had trouble with things he couldn't measure or quantify, with emotions, with closeness, with the kind of relationship that doesn't produce a visible result. He loved me. I believe that completely, but he expressed it in practical ways, and he was deeply uncomfortable with expressions of feeling that he couldn't file away neatly somewhere. Ranger was a problem for him in this sense, because Ranger was purely, unashamedly emotional. He was 100% feeling, 100% of the time. He greeted my father every morning with the full force of his enthusiasm, his tail going like a propeller, his whole back end wiggling, and my father would pat him once, firmly, on the head, the way you acknowledge someone you pass in a hallway and move on. Ranger would watch him go with an expression of undiminished hope, like he was absolutely certain that tomorrow would be the day the full greeting was returned. It never was, but Ranger never stopped trying. My father fed him, made sure he had water, took him to the vet when I couldn't arrange it myself. He discharged his obligations toward Ranger with the same steady reliability. He discharged all his obligations. But he didn't love him. He didn't understand what Ranger meant or what Ranger did for me, and he didn't try to understand, because that kind of understanding would have required a type of emotional engagement that was very difficult for him. What Ranger did for me, during those years of the divorce and the aftermath and the long, complicated process of learning how to live in a house that was half empty and very quiet, what Ranger did was keep me here. Not dramatically, not in the way you're maybe thinking, but in the quiet daily way that matters most. He gave me something to come home to, something that was genuinely glad I existed every single day without condition or qualification. He slept at the foot of my bed and walked with me to the bus stop and sat with me while I did homework and pressed his large warm head into my lap during the moments when the quiet of that house became too heavy. He was my person, my dog, mine in the way that very few things in my life had ever felt like mine. And my father sold him while I was at school. The trouble started, like a lot of troubles do, with money. My father had always been employed. He was an operations manager at a manufacturing company, but the year I turned 17, the company went through a significant restructuring. His role was changed. His salary was reduced. And then, 6 months later, his position was eliminated entirely. He didn't tell me immediately. He's not a man who shares difficulty. He went through the first few weeks of unemployment going through the motions of his old routine, getting up at the same time, getting dressed, leaving the house, and I think for a while he was genuinely confident it would be resolved quickly. A man with his experience, he must have told himself. It would be a matter of weeks. It wasn't a matter of weeks. The months stretched. The energy in the house changed. My father became quieter in a way that was different from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was contained and deliberate, the quiet of someone who has organized their inner life carefully. This new quiet was tight, pressured, like a container that had too much in it. He started making comments about expenses, small ones at first, observations about the electric bill, about groceries, about costs he was tracking with a new and uncomfortable attention. I started turning lights off the moment I left rooms. I stopped asking for things. But Ranger cost money. Not dramatically. He was a healthy dog with no significant medical issues, but he cost money consistently. Food, annual vet visits, flea and tick prevention, the occasional grooming. These were not large amounts, but they were amounts, and amounts had become something my father noticed with sharp and uncomfortable precision. He started making comments about Ranger. Again, small ones at first. "That dog eats more than he should," he said one evening, watching me fill Ranger's bowl. "He's a big dog, Dad." That's a normal portion. My father made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and went back to his newspaper. Another time, watching Ranger's muddy paws track across the kitchen floor, more work than he's worth. I cleaned the floor without responding. Ranger looked at me with those understanding eyes, and I scratched his ears and thought, he doesn't mean it. He's stressed. He's just stressed. I told myself that for a long time. Then the comments became more direct. "Have you thought about whether keeping a dog is practical right now?" my father said at dinner one night in March. I was 17 and a half. It was a Tuesday. I looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean financially. Dogs are an expense." "I can get a job," I said immediately. "I'll pay for his food. I'll pay for his vet appointments. I can cover everything." My father looked at me for a moment. "You've got school. I'll manage. I'll get something on weekends. Dad, I'll handle it completely, I promise. You won't have to spend anything on him." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his food. I got a job that weekend, stocking shelves at a grocery store on Saturday and Sunday mornings. I was there by 6 and I worked until noon, and I came home tired but satisfied in the way that comes from doing something that matters. I bought Ranger's food with my first paycheck. I made a spreadsheet, which was my father's kind of language, and I kept track of every dollar I spent on Ranger and showed it to my father at the end of the month. He looked at the spreadsheet. He nodded. He didn't say much. But he didn't bring up the cost of the dog for a while after that. I thought the crisis had passed. I thought I had solved it. I didn't know that he had already started making other plans. I didn't know this would change everything, but looking back, there were signs. There are always signs. I just wasn't reading them. There was the evening my father was on the phone in the kitchen and went quiet when I came in. There was the time I found a piece of paper on the counter with a phone number on it that he picked up and pocketed quickly when I asked what it was. There was the way he looked at Ranger sometimes in those last few weeks, not with irritation exactly, but with something more like assessment. Like he was calculating something. I see all of it clearly now. At the time, I was 17 and preoccupied with school and my weekend job and the general navigation of being 17, and I didn't look closely enough. The day it happened was a Wednesday in April. I had school until 3 and then stayed late for a history project with 2 classmates. I texted my father around 4 to say I'd be home by 6. He replied with a single okay. Normal. Unremarkable. I walked home from the bus stop the way I always did, already mentally reaching for Ranger, already anticipating the explosion of joy at the front door. The warm collision of golden fur and wagging tail that met me every single day and made the walk worth taking. I put my key in the lock. I opened the door, and the house was quiet. Not just the absence of sound, the absence of presence. You know how a house feels different when a person or an animal has left it. There's something in the air that's different, a quality to the silence that your body recognizes before your brain catches up. I stood in the doorway for a moment, not yet understanding, just registering the wrongness of it. Ranger, I said. Nothing. I stepped inside. I looked at the hook by the door where his leash always hung. Empty. I looked at the corner of the kitchen where his bowls sat. The bowls were gone. The mat they sat on was gone. I walked to the living room. His bed, the large, overstuffed bed that he overflowed enthusiastically in all directions, was gone. I stood in the middle of the living room and the understanding arrived. Not all at once. It came in pieces, each one worse than the last. The missing bowls, the missing leash, the missing bed. The particular kind of goneness that doesn't look like an accident or an emergency, but like someone's decision. Someone's deliberate, planned decision. Dad, my voice came out strange, too even. The voice of someone trying very hard to keep a grip on something. My father's car was in the driveway. I hadn't consciously registered it when I came in, but I knew it. He was home. Dad, louder now. He came out of his home office. He was wearing his work-from-home clothes, which he'd taken to wearing even though there was currently no work, and he had the look on his face that I had never seen before and recognized immediately as something I didn't want to be seeing. A kind of steeled, decided look. A look that had arrived at something and wasn't going back. Where is he? I asked. Sit down, Jamie. Where is Ranger? Sit down and I'll explain. Dad, where is my dog? He exhaled. I found him a good home. A family. They have a big yard, 2 kids who I don't know exactly what happened next in terms of the sequence of things I said and he said. I know there was a conversation. I know it was loud, louder than I had ever been in my life, louder than I knew I was capable of being. I know that my father explained it in his practical way, money, expense, the situation being what it was. He'd done research. The family was suitable. It was the right decision, and I know that with each practical, organized word, something in me became more wild and less contained. I know at some point I said, you had no right. He was mine. And my father said, I'm your parent. Everything in this house is ultimately my responsibility and my decision. And I said, he was mine. And my father said, I know this is hard. But this was the right. I went in my room. I closed the door. And I sat on my bed where Ranger was supposed to be at the foot of it, and I was consumed by a grief that I was not equipped for at 17. The raw, physical kind of grief that takes you apart piece by piece and doesn't ask permission. I cried until there was nothing left to cry. And then I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt the specific, particular rage of someone who has been robbed of something they loved by someone who had the power to do it. My father knocked on my door at 9 that night. I didn't answer. He came in anyway, because he was my father and it was his house, and he sat on the edge of my desk chair in the dark room, and he said, "I called the family. You can call too, to check on him. They seem like good people." "I don't want to call," I said. "I want my dog back." "That's not possible, Jamie." "Then get out of my room." He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and left, and the door closed behind him, and I went back to staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake and I thought about Ranger in an unfamiliar place, in an unfamiliar house, surrounded by people he didn't know. I thought about how he would be looking for me, how he would go to the door and wait for me to come through it with that patient, hope-filled waiting of his. How he would wait and not understand why I wasn't coming. That thought almost destroyed me. The next few days were a particular kind of hell. I went to school because not going would have required explaining things to people, and I wasn't ready for that. I stocked shelves at the grocery store that Saturday because I needed to do something with my hands. I came home each evening and the house was quiet and wrong and my father, and I conducted a cold, careful dance around each other that was nothing like the limited relationship we'd already had. I found out what I could about the family who had taken Ranger. My father had the address, had written it down and left it on the kitchen counter, which was either a peace offering or a practical disclosure, I couldn't tell. A family named the Hendersons. Lived about 12 miles away. 2 kids, 8 and 10. Big yard, my father had said. I wanted to go there. I thought about it constantly, just going, ringing the doorbell, asking to see him. But something stopped me. Some combination of not wanting to make the situation worse and a terrible, cowardly fear of seeing Ranger and then having to leave him again. I didn't think I could survive that. So I stayed away, and the days accumulated, and the house stayed quiet, and the particular sadness of missing him became something I carried around like a weight I'd learned to walk with but couldn't put down. What happened next still haunts me. It was 3 weeks and 2 days after he was gone. I know the exact timing because I had been counting. Not intentionally, but the days had a particular texture that made them stick in my memory, each one marked by its Ranger-lessness. I was home alone on a Saturday afternoon. My father had gone grocery shopping, one of his few regular outings. I was at the kitchen table with my homework spread in front of me, doing the very unconvincing impression of a person who is fine. There was a sound at the front door. Not a knock. Not a doorbell. A sound against the door itself, the kind of sound a nose makes when pressed against the gap at the bottom of a door. And then a different sound. A sound I knew with the entirety of my body in a way that bypassed thought completely. A whine. Low, familiar, and absolutely unmistakable. I was out of my chair before I'd made any decision to move. I crossed the kitchen in what felt like one step. My hand on the door handle. The door open. And there was Ranger. Standing on the front porch, tail beginning a slow, disbelieving wag the moment the door opened. His golden fur matted and dirty and his paws raw and his eyes, those warm, steady, warm brown eyes, looking at me with something that was relief and love and exhaustion all combined into one expression. He had walked home, 12 miles, in 3 weeks, on his own. I dropped to the porch floor and I put my arms around him and he leaned into me with the full weight of his body and I just held on. For a long time, on the porch of my father's house in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. Not saying anything, not thinking about anything, just holding on. He was thinner. He was tired in a deep way that dogs aren't normally tired. His paws were in rough condition, the pads worn and slightly raw, the way they get when an animal has walked significant distances on hard surfaces. He had clearly not had regular food. He smelled like outdoors and effort and the particular smell of an animal who has been on a long journey. But he was alive. He was there. He had found me. I don't fully understand the mechanics of what he did, and I've spent a lot of time since then reading about canine navigation and homing instinct and all the science around it. Dogs have magnetic field detection. They have extraordinary olfactory memory. They have a capacity for spatial orientation that human beings can barely comprehend. The science is real. But here is also what is real. He chose to come back. He found himself in an unfamiliar house with unfamiliar people, and he could have accepted it. Dogs adapt. Dogs adjust. Dogs are remarkably resilient, but he didn't. He decided to come back to me. He made that decision, and he acted on it, and he walked 12 miles on raw paws to stand on that porch and press his nose to the bottom of that door. If that isn't love, I genuinely don't know what is. I got him inside. I got him water. He drank for a long time, steadily and deeply. I got him food and watched him eat. I checked his paws carefully, running my hands over each one, cleaning off the worst of it with a damp cloth. He let me do all of this with a patience that was also new. He was always patient, but this was different. The patience of someone who has been through something and is now resting on the other side of it. A quieter, deeper patience. He ate. He drank. He lay down on the kitchen floor. There was no dog bed. My father had gotten rid of it, and he looked at me where I sat beside him, and his tail moved once, slowly, and then his eyes closed. He was home. I sat beside him on the kitchen floor while he slept, and I thought about 12 miles. I thought about 3 weeks of making that distance in increments I couldn't track, sleeping somewhere unfamiliar, finding water somewhere, navigating through suburban streets and neighborhoods without a map or a guide. I thought about every step of that journey made by an animal who weighed 65 pounds and had warm eyes and had never in his life needed to do anything harder than wait for me at the door. He had done it for me. He had done all of it for me. I heard my father's car in the driveway. The door opened and my father came in with grocery bags and stopped. He looked at Ranger on the kitchen floor. He looked at me sitting beside Ranger. He looked back at Ranger. There was a very long silence. How, my father said. Not quite a question. He walked, I said. 12 miles. My father set the grocery bags down slowly on the counter. He didn't look away from Ranger. Ranger, hearing the new presence, opened his eyes and looked at my father with that expression of his, that unbothered, warm, completely without grudge expression that Ranger had always turned on my father despite years of being given a single firm pat on the head in return. No resentment, no accusation, just those warm brown eyes looking. I watched my father's face do something I had never seen it do. Not break, that's not the right word, but shift, rearrange. Like something that had been held in one position for a very long time was being released. He crossed the kitchen slowly. He stood over Ranger. And then, in a movement that I don't think he planned or decided, in the way that the most real things are always unplanned and undecided, he lowered himself to one knee on the kitchen floor. right there, next to his grocery bags, in his Saturday afternoon clothes. He put his hand on Ranger's head, not the firm, once done pat of 5 years. Something else, something slower and more present. Ranger's tail moved. My father's head dropped. Not all the way. He wasn't a man who let himself go all the way. But enough. His shoulders came down from where they'd been for months, tight and high and braced against everything. They came down. He didn't cry. My father doesn't cry, or if he does, he doesn't do it where people can see. But he knelt there on the kitchen floor with his hand on Ranger's head for long enough that the quality of the silence changed completely. Then he said quietly to Ranger, "You came back." And Ranger closed his eyes and pressed his head slightly upward into my father's hand. My father called the Henderson family that evening. I heard his side of the conversation from the hallway. He was formal about it in the way he was formal about everything, but there was something underneath the formality that I hadn't heard in his voice in a long time. Something close to humility. "I owe you an apology," he told them. "The dog came back to us. I should have thought more carefully about whether this was the right decision. I'm sorry for the inconvenience," and the pause while they spoke. "Yes. No, he's okay. He's home." Another pause. "I understand." "Yes. I'm sorry." He came back into the kitchen. I was sitting at the table again, Ranger now beside me with his head in my lap. My father stood for a moment in the kitchen doorway and looked at us. They weren't unkind to him, he said. Apparently he just wouldn't settle. He kept going to the door. "He was waiting for me," I said. My father was quiet. "I know," he said. "Then, I shouldn't have done it the way I did it. I should have talked to you." For my father, this was an extraordinary statement. He was not a man who revisited decisions or admitted their flaws easily. Every word of that sentence cost him something. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have." "I was trying to solve a problem," he said. "I solve problems by making decisions." He stopped, looked at Ranger. I didn't understand what he was. "He's mine," I said. "He's my dog." "I know that," my father said. And this time when he said it, it meant something different than it had meant before. What came after that was not an overnight transformation. I want to be honest about that because I think the truth matters more than a clean ending. My father didn't suddenly become a different person. He didn't become an animal lover or a man who wore his heart openly or someone who had fundamentally changed his operating system, but things shifted, quietly, in the ways that real changes actually happen. He bought a new dog bed the next day. He brought it home and put it down in the living room without announcement or ceremony, the way he did things. Just placed it there, the fact of it being the communication. He ordered a new set of food bowls. He found a vet near the house and made an appointment to have Ranger's paws checked and treated. Practical things, but chosen differently, done differently. I found him one evening about a week later, sitting on the couch with the news on, and Ranger lying on the floor near his feet. Not on the couch. Ranger had never been allowed on the couch, and that rule remained, but near. And my father's hand was resting, not quite touching, but resting in the direction of Ranger's back, like he was thinking about it. I didn't say anything. I just went to my room. There was another evening, this one harder to write about, and I'll try to do it justice. My father knocked on my bedroom door and came in and sat in the desk chair, the way he had the night after he'd sold Ranger. But the energy of it was completely different. He sat down and he looked at his hands for a moment, and he said, "The divorce was harder on you than I understood. I was focused on getting through it, on keeping things functional, and I think I missed some things." I didn't say anything. I just waited. Ranger wasn't just a dog for you, he said. I understand that now. He paused. I should have understood it before. Yeah, I said. You should have. He nodded. He'd expected that. He absorbed it. Then, I'm sorry, Jamie, for selling him, for how I did it. I'm sorry. My father apologizing was something I could count on one hand the times it had happened. He said it carefully and completely, and without any of the qualifications people use to make apologies smaller. Just, I'm sorry. I said, I know. And then, because I am also my father's kid, and we are both people who express things imperfectly and indirectly, he's okay. He came back. We're okay. My father nodded. He looked toward the door, through which Ranger could be heard in the hallway, the familiar sound of his weight settling on the floor, the small sound of him rearranging himself. And something in my father's face did that thing again, that rearranging, that releasing. He walked 12 miles, my father said, almost to himself. He did, I said. My father shook his head slowly. I've never done anything that loyal in my life, he said. I didn't answer that, because I didn't know what to say, and also because I thought the truth of it was something my father needed to sit with on his own. Ranger is 6 years old now. He sleeps at the foot of my bed still, even though I'm 21 now and the foot of my bed is in an apartment I share with a college roommate 20 minutes from my father's house. He came with me when I moved out last year. That was never in question, never a negotiation, simply a fact. And he adapted to the apartment with the same steady grace with which he adapted to everything. New place, new smells, same person. That's all he needed. I take him back to my father's house regularly, Sunday dinners mostly. My father cooks. It turns out he had a talent for this that he'd suppressed for years, and unemployment, however unwelcome, had given him time to discover it. And Ranger sits in the kitchen while he cooks and watches him with those warm eyes, and my father talks to him. This is the thing that would have been most impossible to predict 4 years ago. My practical, feeling resistant, animal-neutral father talking to a dog while he makes pasta sauce, not about big things, not confessions or revelations, about the sauce, about the news, about whatever he's thinking. Low, conversational, easy talk. The kind of talk you can only have with someone you trust completely not to judge you. Ranger listens with complete attention, the way he always has, and sometimes my father will look down at him and say something like, "You think it needs more basil?" And Ranger will look at the pot and then back at my father, and my father will say, "Yeah, you're right," and add the basil. And there is something in that exchange that makes my heart feel a specific and complicated and completely full way. My father's employment situation resolved eventually. It took longer than either of us wanted, and it was harder than I knew, because he carried most of that difficulty privately in the way he carried everything. But he found a new position about 8 months after the layoff, and the financial pressure that had driven everything gradually released. He never brought up what he'd done with Ranger in relation to the money again. I think he knew, and I knew, and we both knew that the money had been real, but it hadn't been the whole story. There was something else underneath it, some calculation being made about what mattered and what didn't, about what was essential and what was expendable. And Ranger's 12-mile walk had answered that question in a way no argument I could have made ever would have. Some lessons have to be walked to you on raw paws. Some truths can only be delivered by someone who doesn't have words but has everything else. I've thought a lot about what Ranger knew that my father didn't, what he understood that took my father so much longer to reach. Ranger knew that some things are worth the distance. That love is not a comfort or a convenience, but a decision, one you make even when it costs you, even when the path is uncertain, even when your paws are hurting and you don't know exactly how far you still have to go. He made that decision over 12 miles and 3 weeks, and however many steps it took, and he made it not because he had to, but because he chose to, because I was his person, because that's what his person meant to him. My father understands this now, not in a theoretical way, in the way that rearranges you. I think about what would have happened if Ranger had stayed, if he'd accepted the Henderson house and the new family and the big yard and built a new life there, the way dogs can and do. He would have been okay. He would have survived. He might even have been happy. But I would have lost something that I'm not sure I could have recovered from at 17 in that quiet house in the middle of everything that was already hard. I needed him. And somewhere in that extraordinary, mysterious, impossible to fully explain mind of his, he knew that. He came back for me. And in coming back for me, he brought something back for my father too. Something my father hadn't known he was missing, something he hadn't even known he needed. There's a version of this story where Ranger stays with the Hendersons, and my father and I circle each other in that quiet house for years, connected but not close, each one managing his own distance. I think about that version sometimes. I think about how easy it would have been for that to be the story. But Ranger didn't let it be the story. Because that was Ranger. That was always Ranger. Choosing connection when disconnection was easier. Choosing the hard way because the hard way led back to the people he loved. Pressing his nose to the bottom of a door and waiting for someone to notice. Patient, loyal, impossibly, perfectly, extraordinarily loyal. If you have a dog in your life, if there's an animal who meets you at the door and makes the walk home worth taking, I want you to know something that I know now and will never stop knowing. What they give you is not a small thing. It is not a comfort or a convenience or a nice addition to your life. It is something ancient and true and extraordinary, and it does not ask for very much in return, and it deserves to be protected. Don't let anyone call it just a dog. Don't let anyone reduce it to expense or inconvenience or wait to be managed. It is a life that has chosen yours. It is loyalty in its purest, most uncalculated form. My father learned this on a Saturday afternoon in April, kneeling on a kitchen floor with his hand on a golden retriever who had walked 12 miles to come home. He learned it the hard way, the way he learned most things. But he learned it. And Ranger, being Ranger, had already forgiven him before he even asked. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a pet find their way back to you, or surprise you with something you didn't expect. I want to read every single one of those stories. And if you believe that pets are family, that they deserve to be treated with the same love and permanence that we give the people who matter most to us, subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification bell, because we tell these stories every week, the ones that remind us what loyalty really looks like, the ones that make you want to go home and hold your dog a little longer tonight. Go do that. Go hold them. They walked 12 miles for you. The least we can do is show up. This story was inspired by and adapted from real-life experiences. Some details, names, and timelines have been adjusted to protect the privacy of those involved. The love, the loyalty, the 12 miles, that part belongs to every dog who has ever chosen to come home.